So that's what y'all want to see, huh?
In a battle between two tough and physical first-place teams, the Philadelphia Eagles show that they're the biggest bullies on the block and extend their win streak to a franchise record 10 games. Jalen Hurts silenced a lot of doubters this week, and the defense continues to show that they're championship material. Welcome to the Philly Film Room Podcast. We have, for a 10th time in a row, another victory podcast. But this isn't a regular victory podcast. This is a victory podcast over another playoff team, another first-place team. And even though they were shorthanded, this Pittsburgh Steelers team came to play. They did not back down from the challenge. They were hitting hard and they were hitting a lot. They were forcing turnovers. They were putting the Eagles in tough positions and they were really challenging them, right? We saw that brawl and that scrap that they had, but the Eagles didn't back down. And this was a big win for them, a big statement win, especially after a week of turmoil from the media, from some parts that they created themselves internally in their locker room. This was a good game to get things back on track and get another convincing victory. But having said that, let's jump into today's pod and today's review. And we're going to start with the offense. And this offense really was all about Jalen Hurts and the passing game. And a day where finally the run game really didn't show up to the degree that we're used to seeing it. This was a day for the for the passing game to shine, and shine they did. They opened the game going empty in 12 personnel and then running a stick nod concept attacking Elandon Roberts. And we talked about it in the preview podcast, how Elandon Roberts would come in on early downs and Peyton Wilson would come in on longer down and distances for coverage. And the Eagles knew this, so they got into 12 personnel, spread them out, and directly targeted Elandon Roberts. And that really lets you know what kind of game that this was going to be, because the Eagles really started throwing around the yard in this game. When we look at Jalen Hurts in specific, he had 290 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns. He had a passer rating of 125.3 and 45 rushing yards. Those numbers in specific, his passer rating was the highest of any quarterback that has faced a Steelers defense this season, and his rushing yards were the second most of any quarterback this season. It would have been tied for first if not for the kneel downs. But Jalen had 9.1 yards per attempt, which was his 4th highest of the season, despite just a 6.7 average depth of throw, right? So there was a lot of talk about how Jalen isn't really pushing the ball down the field that much this season, really over the past 4 or 5 weeks. But really the thing is, you can create explosive plays by getting the ball out on time, accurately, and to your playmakers. And that's exactly what happened this game. Jalen, for a large part of the game, there were some plays that you definitely would like to have back, but for a large part of the game, Jalen was playing quick and he was playing on time. He was getting the ball out of his hands. And when he is able to do that, that creates big plays. They have weapons and playmakers all over the field. And getting the ball out on time allows those playmakers to shine and get a lot of yards after catch, right? The longer you hold on to the ball, the less opportunity you have generally for your receivers to create after the catch, because the defense is able to condense and close down on that space, right? So by him getting the ball out quickly in a number of different plays, a number of plays to Kenny Gainwell in the flat, plays to DeVonta Smith, plays to A.J. Brown, getting the ball out and to his receivers quickly allowed everyone to play on time. And this is the offense that we've been wanting to see over the past couple weeks. It allowed them to keep the chains moving, allowed them to stay ahead of the sticks, even if they weren't going for big plays. A lot of times they were, but even if the plays didn't go for big plays, it allowed the offense to stay ahead of the stick so they didn't get into 2nd and 10 a whole lot. 2nd and 6 is a whole lot better than 2nd and 10. Now, Jalen's average time to throw was still 3.36 seconds, and there were some plays that you'd like to have back in this game, especially in the first half. There were plays where Jalen was bailing the pocket way too early, not letting routes develop, and when that happens, the offensive line isn't able to secure their blocks or let those blocks mature, right? So what I mean by that is, for offensive tackles that are trying to push the edge rushers up the pocket, when Jalen's getting to the top of his drop and then immediately taking off, well, those offensive linemen don't have as much space, or they haven't created as much space by pushing those defensive ends up the pocket, and it makes it easier for those guys to fall back into sacks, right? So just by holding onto the ball a little bit more in the second half, not only do we see routes start to develop, we saw Jalen be able to take advantage of and utilize some of the passing concepts that were designed. But you also saw situations where there was more space for him to scramble just by waiting a little bit. He also got the team out of some sticky situations when the pass rush did break down, but that's part of the Jalen Hurts experience. That's part of what makes him so dangerous, is he is able to create on his own when things break down. And we saw that in a big degree, especially in the second half. Now, there was one of the sacks he took, definitely was one you'd like to have back, where it was 3rd and 13. He started rolling to his left because he was staring at AJ, and then that allowed TJ Watt to come around the edge. Lane Johnson's trying to push TJ Watt up and past the quarterback, but when your quarterback's drifting, it's just hard to stay in front of that pass rusher at that point in time. If Jalen had stepped up in the pocket, he would have created a much better angle for Lane to block TJ Watt, and you wouldn't have seen that sack. More importantly, Jalen really needed to make sure that he was putting both hands on the ball, because he almost had a second fumble when TJ Watt came down on the sack. You saw Jalen with much better, not only pocket presence, climbing the pocket, moving within the pocket, finding the quiet parts of the pocket. You'll hear coaches say that, find the quiet part of the pocket, and then delivering strikes from there. We saw a lot of that in the second half, but we also saw him with better ball security in the second half. We saw him with 2 hands on the ball when he was moving around. So halftime came and went, and we saw a much better Jalen Hurts in the second half. The first quarter is pretty damn good by Jalen, but once you got to the second quarter, he started to revert back to some of the stuff we saw from the Panthers. They regrouped at halftime. I don't know what happened at halftime, what the message was, but he came back out and had a fantastic game. Now, when we look at, I want to talk about something that I think gets overlooked when we talk about the Jalen Hurts discussion. And really, it is Jalen somewhat as a game manager, right? I think this point about Jalen gets overlooked way too much. And not enough talk is about how Jalen consistently gets the team into the right play. And it's not just in the pass game. A lot of it's in the run game. A lot of the rushing success is partly due to Jalen Hurts making sure that we check into the right play to either give the ball to Saquon, or sometimes it's a play for Jalen to keep, right? But it's very similar to Tom Brady. It's Tom Brady-esque, the way that he is able to get the team into the right plays. Tom Brady people always consider him for being a guy that kills you with a million paper cuts. He'll check down to his backs and throw underneath the players all the time. But he was also really good at identifying fronts and figuring out which runs are the best runs to get the team into. That is part of being a quarterback. You are the coach on the field, especially when you're paid this much money. You have to be able to identify what the team is presenting and then get the team into the best play. And with the Eagles being a run-dominant, run-first team, you have to get the team into the right run plays. Some run plays are going to work better against certain fronts and against certain things that the defense likes to do. And Jalen Hurts is really good at doing that. We've seen, and you hear him every single week.
Rally Stanley! Rally Stanley!
He's expecting it quick. The line's expecting it quick. That's rhythmic passing offense.
Meanwhile, DeVonta Smith, game-high 9 catches for 75 yards. Here's Barkley. Good cut for him, and surging forward.
Jalen Hurts coming up to the line of scrimmage, changing the play, and then they run whatever play it is. There's a play that longtime listeners of this channel will probably be tired of hearing. I probably mentioned it 3 or 4 times now. There was a play from the Bills last year where Jalen uses a hard count to get the defense to shift.
But they call it a target line. That's like a target he built. But I'd also want my target to be the 3-yard line.
He's going to keep it.
Great play call.
And he's going to run for about 9.
And then from that hard count, he's able to figure out, oh, this defense is actually about to rotate the other way. He checks into a different play, and then they get an 8-yard gain to kick off their first drive of overtime against the Bills last year. So I think Jalen, as a game manager and getting the team into the right plays, a lot of that conversation gets overlooked when we talk about Jalen can't read a defense, or Jalen can't do this or can't do that. But I also wanted to talk about the post-game interaction between Jalen Hurts and Russell Wilson. I've talked about many times how Jalen reminds me of Russell Wilson so much. And then you see after the game, Jalen made it a point to go up to Russ and say that he essentially watched him his whole childhood growing up. And he said something along the lines of he paved the way for Jalen to make it in this league. And you see a lot of Russ's influence in Jalen's game, right? People take that as a negative if you look at Russ as of late, particularly his Denver Broncos years, but he's been playing really good football for the Steelers this year, but that's not a negative. Go back to the early part, or even up to the mid and later parts of his Seahawks tenure. He made a lot of good plays. And don't forget, he's a Super Bowl winner. When you look back to that 2013 Super Bowl season, that Seahawks team was 4th in rushing yards. But a big part of that was Russell Wilson, what he's able to do with his legs. Russ was had the 3rd highest rushing yards of any quarterback that season, 7th most designed rushing yards. And the things that Russell Wilson is able to do on the ground was able to open up things for Marshawn Lynch, to make things easier for Marshawn Lynch, right? Running read options and having your quarterback designed run games, right? But you also have Russell Wilson, who can throw a beautiful deep ball. Jalen Hurts can do that as well. Sometimes Russell Wilson holds on to the ball too long, but he also creates a lot of magical moments. We see that with Jalen Hurts. They both are very similar in stature and play style and just overall mentality with how they play the game. And you see a lot of that come across, and you definitely can say, I don't know why I ever didn't put 2 and 2 together, but when Jalen was in high school, who was a quarterback that was one of the best in the league? It was Russell Wilson. So it makes total sense that Jalen, probably with his dad, who was a coach in high school, they spent a lot of time looking at Russell Wilson and seeing how Jalen could implement some of that stuff in his game, knowing that they're both smaller quarterbacks with stockier builds and are athletic players, right? So I thought that was interesting to see. Now, when we look at some of the other players on the team that had good games, naturally paired with Jalen having a good game was A.J. Brown and DeVonta Smith having big games as well. A.J. Brown had 8 receptions for 110 yards, a touchdown, and I guess it turns out Jalen and A.J. are best friends. Who would have thought? But 9 of A.J.'s 11 targets came against man coverage, and coming into the game, we were talking about it. They love to run a lot of single high coverage, a lot of man coverage, a lot of press. The Steelers defense does. And we know who gets the ball when it's going to be man coverage, and it's going to be A.J. Brown, and he did not disappoint. It's not like he was running a super diverse route tree. It was a lot of slants. It was a lot of go routes, some curl routes. It wasn't super complex of a route tree, but it doesn't need to be complex. When you got a guy like A.J. Brown that can beat one-on-one coverage like that, get him those easy completions on those slants and let him go to work. They threw up a couple one-on-one fades down the sideline, a couple go routes down the sideline. He only caught 1 of 3, I believe, in this game, but still testing the defense and making them honor the deep pass. In particular, there was a sequence to get them off the goal line for a big 3rd down conversion on their last drive of the game. On the first play of the drive, number 1, AJ ends up false starting. Second play, they come out. They ran probably what they were going to run on the first play. And Joey Porter Jr. is pressed up on A.J. Brown. You see A.J. hop into a split base so that he can threaten and give the illusion that he can break in any direction. But he takes a speed release to the outside. Wasn't much of a setup. Didn't give a whole lot of sauce off the line. Just hopped into a split base and then immediately speed release down the sideline. Joey Porter Jr. was able to squeeze him to the sideline pretty easily. But they came back to this play, or they came back on 3rd down, just a couple plays later, came back on 3rd down. JPJ was pressed up on A.J. Brown again. A.J. uses the exact same release pattern. Hops into a split base, speed release, but he is doing that to show he threw his fastball in the first play, and then he's coming back with the changeup. And this time he's using that to get Joey Porter Jr. to squeeze him to the sideline, and then he just tosses Joey and then gets wide open, catches a slant, and then takes it for like 19 yards or something, breaks a couple of tackles. Typical A.J. Brown route. But it was beautiful to see him hit him with the setup and then come back with the counter later on the exact same drive. So it was great to see. Looking at DeVonta Smith, he was also incredibly efficient. He had 10 catches on 11 targets, and the 1 incomplete pass was really a throwaway. So it was really 100% day when Jalen was targeting DeVonta Smith. He also had a touchdown, which I broke down in more detail on a specific YouTube video, so check that out. It also encompasses a few other plays from earlier in the season as well. But DeVonta was mainly used as an underneath target in this game. He ran a lot of hitches, a lot of curls, a lot of drag routes, some slants in there. He really found spots in zone. He got some targets in man coverage. He had a nice whip route against man coverage to get wide open against Joey Porter. Again, he got beat up a little bit in this game. But for the most part, it was finding spots in the zone. He was really a reliable possession receiver, really a possession receiver in this game, because we know DeVonta Smith can hit a lot of big plays. He is a big play possession receiver in a lot of regards. But who had a big game was Big Game Gainwell, though. He has made a lot of big plays this season, and I talked about it in one of the Best Bets preview episodes, that Kenny Gainwell had the most explosive, or the highest explosive run rate of any running back in the NFL. Now, this was before the Panthers game, and so I assume he had a couple explosive runs in that game, so I assume he's still number one. But in this game, he really showed up through the air. He had 3 receptions for 40 yards, and they were all big-time plays. They were all on third down, and some of them were plays where he had to make a guy miss, a beautiful spin move where he sent a guy flying. Then there was another play on, it must have been like a third and medium or 3rd and 8, something like it. Might have been longer than that. I should have wrote down the exact yardage on the play, but Jalen got the ball out to Kenny very quickly in the flat. Kenny takes it, catches it immediately in one stride, catches the ball, pierces upfield, makes a guy miss, and almost scores a touchdown. Really impressive plays from Kenny Gainwell, and I hope that Jalen sees the value of getting the ball to the running backs in the passing game. This team can take a next step in the passing game if Jalen gets to some of his checkdowns a little bit quicker, or if he gets to some of those plays aren't even checkdowns. When you have a guy's running a flat and another guy's running a slant or a hitch, that flat route isn't a checkdown route. That is just a read that is part of the initial play design. Just getting the ball to your running backs. These guys make guys miss in space, both Saquon and Kenny Gainwell. So hopefully low risk, but I would say with the backs we have, medium to high reward plays, and they can help keep your offense on schedule, especially if nothing is open further down the field. I thought there were some more plays in this game where Jalen probably could have gotten the ball to his backs in the passing game, but you could say that with pretty much every quarterback in every game. I don't want him to turn into check down Charlie. I don't want him to become Sam Bradford, where all he does is check down, and I don't think that's going to happen with Jalen Hurts, but I do think and hope that we see Jalen continue to develop and get the ball to the running backs in the passing game. When we look at what was happening on the offensive line, we had the Lane Johnson versus TJ Watt matchup. And this was a big heavyweight matchup. This is going to be one of the best pass rushers that Lane Johnson faces all year. When they play the Cowboys move Micah Parsons around. The Steelers don't do that with TJ Watt. And we know that the Eagles keep their offensive tackles on an island at the second highest rate of any team in the NFL. So we knew we were going to get a lot of one-on-one matchups with TJ Watt. And PFF credited Lane with 1 pressure. I don't know if they counted that pressure against TJ Watt. I know there was a stat going around showing that PFF had credited Lane with 0 pressures. They must have gone back and updated it, because when I've went and looked on Tuesday morning to update some of the stats, it showed Lane with a pressure. I will say, I thought he lost a couple reps. Did they directly turn into pressures? Pressures can be subjective, but if you look at it, did it look like TJ got him on a couple reps? Absolutely. There was a play where Nick Herbig definitely got him for a pressure that forced Jalen to step up. Jalen got out of a sticky situation there. But for the most part, it was very similar to how their 2020 matchup went, where TJ Watt had a couple wins early in that game. But as the game went along, Lane Johnson got better and better and better as he started to figure out what he needed to do to slow down TJ Watt. And that was true in this game. Now, I know some people are going to say TJ Watt had 2 sacks, and he definitely did. But one of the sacks was a play where Jalen hit the top of his drop and just decided to run too quickly. And a lot of what we talked about earlier, when you don't have the time to push the edge rusher up the pocket, it makes it a lot easier for them to fall back into the sack. That's not a sack. That is on Lane Johnson. There was another sack where it's 3rd and 13. Jalen starts drifting to his left. We talked about this one as well. Lane was not able to, he pushed TJ Watt up the pocket, but when your quarterback isn't helping the offensive line out by stepping up in the pocket, it just makes it easier for that defensive end to run the hoop. PFF didn't credit him with a sack for that as well. I would say that Jalen could have avoided that sack with better pocket presence. But there was no dire consequences really of Lane losing on the reps that I thought he lost on. Overall, I thought he had a really good game, getting very little help. There was probably maybe 2 or 3 plays where he got a chip from a tight end, but for the most part, it was Lane against TJ Watt all game long, and I would say Lane came out the victor in that game. When we look at the rest of the offensive line, Jordan Mailata was dominant in pass pro and in the run game. He's credited with 2 pressures allowed. They were both hurries. Neither were quarterback hits, so no one touched the quarterback as a result of Jordan Mailata. When he was facing, and we got to remember, he was facing Alex Highsmith, who coming into the game was 7th in pressure rate and 4th in pass rush win rate among all edge rushers with a minimum of 100 snaps. He also had a very beautiful high level, high technique rep against Alex Highsmith. Highsmith, as we know, one of his go-to moves is a spin move. And Highsmith tried to throw the spin move against Jordan Mailata, and Mailata spun against the spinner, right? Spin against the spinner, put himself back into position to block Jalen Hurts. Now, here's the thing about that play. That was definitely something that Jeff Stoutland has taught. I know he's taught this technique. I know it wasn't just pulled out of Jordan Mailata's ass. When we look at, let's take a look at this clip from legendary offensive line coach Mouse McNally.
Right from the get-go in training camp, I would teach this. Defensive guy spins, you spin. Okay, let's go. He spins, you spin. Okay. He spins, you spin.
And the thing about Mouse McNally is Jeff Stoutland has credited him with a lot of the techniques that the Eagles offensive line currently uses, right? So I know for a fact that they were repping this at some point in practice, knowing that they're facing Alex Highsmith, and he's a guy that loves to use spin moves. It's not your go-to move against a guy that tries to spin. That's not your go-to move. But if you get into a situation where you need to be able to pull that out, you'd rather have that tool in the tool belt than not have it. And it's impressive to see Jordan Mailata doing that at 380 freaking pounds, right? But in the run game, there's a number of plays where he was moving Cam Hayward off the line on his own. Keanu Benton, he was creating displacement along the line of scrimmage as well. So I thought he had a good game overall, and he's been one of the best one of the best players in the NFL this year. Looking at some of the other players, Tyler Steen, he's a starting guard in the NFL. He's not starting for this team right now, but he's a starting guard in the NFL. He wasn't perfect in this game, but considering the matchup, I thought he had a number of really good reps. He flashed a lot of good stuff on tape, and he's done that really all year. There were some bad reps for sure, but number one, I think of the matchup. It was a tough matchup against Cam Hayward and this Steelers front. But when I look at some of the teams around the league, you know, the Chicago Bears would love to have a guy like Tyler Steen. There's a lot of teams around the NFL that would really like to have a guy like Steen, and the Eagles have him as their backup offensive guard. He stepped in, and this Eagles offense was still able to keep the party rolling once Landon Dickerson went down. I do think Mekhi Becton, he had some really good reps, but I thought he struggled in pass pro on a few reps as well. He did have trouble getting to the second level in the run game on a couple of reps as well. I got to talk about it a little bit. I didn't really like their game plan on the ground. A lot of outside zone, and this isn't really an outside zone team. It's nice for a changeup, but as their go-to run for the game, I don't know about that. They're a team that's built to run downhill at you. And I know that the Steelers are stout on the interior, but you can't just let them dictate and take you out of what you do best. You still have to find ways to be able to do what you do best. And I thought if they played this game again, that they would come with some more downhill concepts. I thought they would use Jalen Hurts' legs on a few more plays, or at least use the threat of his legs to help them gain a numbers advantage in the box. They did that on a few plays, but I thought that's something that they could have done a little bit more. I also didn't like, they would bring in their wide receivers tight to the line of scrimmage on a number of plays. That was really just bringing an extra defender into the box. And there was a number of plays where they weren't able to block that player, and then that player ended up making the tackle on the run. And those wide receivers have been used creatively to insert into the box and to make blocks in previous games. I didn't think they were that creative in their use of their wide receivers in the run game this week. But overall, I didn't think the execution was great, Part of that is to be expected going against a tough and stout front like the Steelers have. Their linebackers played really well as well. Patrick Queen was all over the place. But they did start to create movement on the line of scrimmage as the game went on. They started to wear the Steelers defense out, and they were really starting to create some push along the line of scrimmage and giving Saquon Barkley some places to run. But on the final drive of the game, they went back to the well one too many times. They ran the same outside zone play twice in a row. The second time that they ran it, the nose tackle was able to just get across Cam Jurgens' face quickly and cut the run off. Then they went back to another variation of one of their outside zone plays. I think it was outside zone. And then Minkah Fitzpatrick, before the play even started, he was pointing and was letting everyone know that we're about to shift the tight end back across the formation. Minkah was able to shoot the gap. He knew exactly the play that was coming. The thing is, you can run the same plays multiple times in a row. The Eagles have done it successfully throughout the years. The most famous example of this is when Jim Harbaugh was at Stanford and he was playing Pete Carroll's USC team, and he just kept running the same play over and over and over again. So you can have success doing that. And again, that was Stanford as the underdogs, but they came out and they just kept running the ball down Pete Carroll's throat. But there's certain teams like the Steelers, they're too good. They are too smart. They have too many veterans on that defense to continue running the same plays over and over and over again like that. So I think they didn't do themselves any favors. I didn't think they were super diverse in their run game plan this week, and I didn't like their plays that they decided to run going outside zone heavy. But looking at some of the final things that I did like, other things I liked, the Eagles used a lot of empty in this game, a heavy emphasis of empty in this game. They were extremely efficient and empty. And number one, it makes the reads easier for the quarterback when you go to empty. Teams generally have a few empty checks that they use, so you kind of neuter what the defense does. And then when you spread things out, it makes it easier to see who's blitzing, who's not blitzing. You can kind of target matchups a little bit easier. But Jalen's legs, Jalen's ability to run, even from empty, having the run threat, that the offense still has the ability to run the ball with a quarterback like Jalen Hurts when you're in empty, it really puts a lot of stress on the defense, and it makes them play in certain ways. And from there, you can kind of pick your poison with what you want to do. And we saw Jalen efficient throwing the ball from empty. We also saw a quarterback draw from empty as well. I think they might have motioned Saquon Barkley out of the backfield, so it didn't start empty, but it ended in an empty formation, and they ended up getting a big gain on a quarterback draw. I also like that they used tempo. They used tempo in a good amount of plays in the game. They would get to the line of scrimmage. Jalen would read the defense, get into plays they liked, and they were able to wear down the defense from there. And then we got to talk about the drive, the last 21 play, 10-minute, and 29-second drive to ice the game. It was incredibly impressive considering the fact that the run game wasn't as consistent and as reliable as in past games. So a lot of that came down to Jalen having to make plays with his arm, with DeVonta having to make plays through the air, AJ having to make plays through the air. Their playmakers stepped up in other ways. And then you got an offensive line that was just dominating, especially in pass pro at that point in time. So it really capped a dominant day from the offense and from the defense. So having said that, let's jump into the defense. The defense was just as probably more dominant than what the offense was. They allowed the Steelers' lowest yardage total of the season, and it's the third team that they've held below 200 total yards. And it was the 10th straight game where the defense allowed 20 points or less. The Steelers only ran 41 plays, and really the defense is playing with so much swagger and confidence right now. There is a lot of shit talking going on from that defense. They are playing like the best defense in the NFL. They know that they're playing like that, and they're going to let you know that they know it. So it's a lot of fun to see them now, see that confidence growing and then showing out on the field, and not just playing like the best defense, but acting like the best defense. And they're still so young. So there's a lot to be happy about with this team now and going into the future. But when we look at this defense, I said it's the best defense in the NFL. They're currently tied for first in points per game allowed. They were first in yards per game allowed. They have the third lowest yards per game allowed in the past 5 seasons. So any season since 2020 at 275.6 yards per game. But here's the crazy part. They allowed 365.8 yards before the bye week. After the bye week, they're allowing 239.5 yards per game. That is historically dominant. Since 2000, only the 2008 Steelers and 2000 Titans allowed a lower yards per game than what the Eagles are averaging since the bye week. Now, the Eagles aren't going to go down in history with those numbers because you have to factor in the whole year. But since the bye week, since they've adjusted to Fangio's scheme and Fangio's adjusted to his personnel, since Cooper DeJean has come in to the lineup, this team has been one of the best defenses since the turn of the century. Currently, their 275.6 yards per game allowed would rank the 23rd best since 2000. So what were they doing in this game? And really, I'm going to sound like a broken clock. They were doing the things that they've been doing in every game since the bye week. They've been playing physical. They've been playing with a lot of effort. They've been playing mistake-free. Well, mostly mistake-free football. You're never going to have all 11 guys play mistake-free football on every single down in a game. But for the most part, they're playing mistake-free football. When we look at what happened schematically, they matched the Steelers' heavy personnel with their base personnel. We saw a lot of 5 and 6 down fronts. As a result, Cooper DeJean only played 67% of the snaps. And we kind of predicted that in the preview podcast when the Eagles, when their Eagles opponents go heavy, they're going to have to match with heavy personnel. DeJean ends up playing a little bit less. But the Steelers only averaged 3.3 yards per carry. The Eagles defense ran a lot of single high coverages on early downs. They switched to more split field coverages on longer down and distance. And when we look at this team, what's so good about them is that they can beat you in multiple different ways with multiple different coverages. One of the teams that had, over the past 5 seasons, that had a lower yards per game allowed was last year's Cleveland Browns team. But the problem with that team is they relied on such a simple game plan and where it was a lot of man coverage, a lot of single high defense. But the Eagles can play in multiple different ways. They can beat you playing a lot of man coverage. We've seen that in certain games. They can beat you playing a lot of quarters coverages, a lot of cover 6 and cover 8 and split field coverages. They can beat you and match and meld their game plan to take away what you do best. And that is why they have been so damn good since the bye week. But when we look at when the Steelers eventually did score a touchdown, they had to scratch and claw their way all the way down the field. On that touchdown drive, it took them 11 plays to go 70 yards. 15 of those yards came on the BS penalty against Reed Blankenship. I don't really know what they want Reed to do there. He didn't launch himself into the quarterback. It was a late slide for the quarterback. I know they're saying he hit him with the head or neck area, but if you want the defender to pull up and come over top of the quarterback and he's sliding late, well, you're going to be more likely to hit the guy in the head. He didn't go full on Azeez Al-Shaair, never go full Azeez Al-Shaair, but he didn't go full on Azeez and just try and decimate the quarterback. I don't know what you really want from these guys on that play. Hopefully those plays can be reviewable in the future, but that's a conversation for the offseason. On that drive as well. So it took 15 yards, came from the BS penalty. Then it took Justin Fields' quarterback sweep play. It took 2 scrambles by Russell Wilson. And if you take out the penalty yardage, the Steelers averaged 5 yards per play on that drive. They had to scratch and claw all the way down the field. And the thing is, when the Eagles give up touchdowns, they're not giving up big plays. You're not hitting them and getting 3 or 4 play drives to score. It's taking 7, 8, 9, 10. Remember that touchdown drive to open the Bengals game? It takes a long-ass drive where you have to convert many third downs. They don't just give you touchdowns. They make you earn it. And if you earn a touchdown against the Eagles, well, you'll shake your hand and say good job. But I bet you won't do it more than one time the rest of the game. When we look at the rest of the Steelers' drives, though, it's pretty comical to look at some of the numbers. Here are their drives broken down. First drive, 3 plays, 3 yards. Next drive, 3 play, 2 yards. Next drive, 3 plays, negative 11 yards. Next drive, 4 plays, negative 8 yards. Next drive, 3 plays, negative 5 yards. They had negative 19 yards on their first 5 drives. Then they have the 11 play 55-yard touchdown drive. Then they have their next drive, 5 plays, 14 yards. Then 4 plays, 38 yards, which included a first play flea flicker out of halftime. If any team is telling you they're desperate to move the ball, it's a team that is running flea flicker first play coming out at halftime. And that was the Pittsburgh Steelers. Final drive of the game, 7 plays, 24 yards. So like I was saying, if you want to move the ball in the Eagles, you are going to have to scratch and claw your way for every single yard. Looking at some of the defensive standouts, Nolan Smith had a big game. He's probably the best player in this game or had the biggest impact in this game. He led the team with 5 pressures, according to PFF, and he did have the plus matchup in this game going against Broderick Jones. If you look at any player on the Steelers offense that I thought was a weak point, it was Broderick Jones, but you still have to take advantage, and Nolan Smith took advantage. And we saw his pass rush game plan. It's really starting to flourish. He had a good game against Taylor Moton the week before. I know he wasn't credited with a lot of pressures, but I thought he had a lot of wins in that game, even if they didn't count as pressures. He continued that this week against a much, much worse offensive tackle. He flashed a nice bull rush to set up a ghost technique. He also had a stutter with a head fake to set up a swipe rip move, and he showed good bend around the edge. He also collapsed the pocket on Josh Sweat's sack. He had a nice tip pass on a stunt as well. And the stunt didn't necessarily work, but it did work to create layers to the pass rush. And to put Nolan Smith in the throwing window, he was able to get his hands up and tip the pass. And add to that as well, they were able to keep Russell Wilson, keep him in a box with their rush lane integrity on that stunt. And we talked about it coming into the game. You need to keep Russ in the pocket. You don't want him to beat you with long passes down the sideline or breaking contain and extending plays. That is how he beats you. Make him beat you from the pocket. They did a good job of that for most part of this game. There was a couple plays where they had bad rush lane integrity. One was from Nolan Smith, essentially trying to do his best Michael Jordan impression and jump over a running back and pass pro. He ends up losing contain. Jordan Davis lost pass rush lane integrity on another play as well. But for the most part, they were condensing the pocket, constricting the pocket, and keeping Russell Wilson in the pocket. Hopefully that continues on in next week when they play Jaden Daniels yet again. But that was a nice tip pass from Nolan Smith. He also had on his sack, it was a nice second effort sack where he was able to use his bend and burst to get around the edge and get a sack. And again, it was helped by Josh Sweat collapsing the pocket from the other side as well. Russell Wilson didn't have a place to step up, and he had drifted back and ended up getting sacked by Nolan Smith. I thought overall the team did a good job rushing as a unit. Part of that, we talked about keeping Russ in the pocket, but on a number of the sacks that they had, it was because they were able to get pushed from the interior that pushed Russell Wilson back a step for an edge rusher to come around from behind and ultimately finish the sack. But Nolan was also good in coverage. Last week, there was a play where he didn't carry a wheel route down the sideline as a flat defender. The Steelers came out and almost ran the same exact concept this week, but this week they made the correction, and Nolan knew that in that coverage, he was going to have to match and run with the wheel route down the sideline. And then Nolan was excellent in run support. Again, as always, that's something that we don't really need to mention week to week. When we look at Josh Sweat's sack, it was a nice combination of an excellent motor and a good secondary rush. He missed on the initial cross chop move, but when he went to club through, he knocked the offensive lineman's hand away. He refit the hand, he chopped and swiped at it again to knock that hand down, while at the same time keeping his feet moving, and he was able to bend the edge, rip through, and come up with the sack. When we look at Jalen Carter, he didn't get a ton of one-on-one opportunities, but he did have a really nice pressure on a stutter jab that set up an outside club swim move. And the great part about this move is we talked about on the podcast last week, there's a number of times where Jalen was just clubbing or trying to knock the hands away, and then he'd leave his opposite hand free, kind of dangling there, not being put to use. This week we saw him finish with a swim over that cleared his shoulders and his hips past the offensive lineman, and he was able to get a pressure on that play. He was also really disruptive in the run game on multiple plays as well. Even if he wasn't able to be as disruptive in the pass game because of how much attention he was getting, he was still disruptive in the run game. But again, they only played 41 plays. There's only so many opportunities for these guys to make an impact. Milton Williams and Moro Ojomo collapsed the pocket on several occasions as well. Milton had a really nice quick pressure on a stutter swipe move that led to a tip pass. Russ had his second quickest time to throw of the season, but still PFF credited him with 9 pressures on 26 dropbacks. Jalix Hunt knocked offensive tackle Dan Moore Jr. into the backfield on a run rep as well. He did the same thing against another tight end earlier in the game. He is showing off his physicality and why the Eagles drafted him where they drafted him. Full disclosure, I really wanted them to go with the linebacker at the time, Peyton Wilson, so I wasn't too happy that they kept trading back and ultimately selected Jalix Hunt, who I didn't think would have much of an impact this year. But when you look at the guy like Jalix Hunt, he is a traits guy, and those traits are showing up. And Zach Bond has showed out. Nakobe Dean has stepped up. And so we really didn't need another linebacker. Things are working out well for this team. But Nakobe Dean, speaking of Nakobe, was physical, shedding blocks and being disruptive in the run game. Zach Bond was probably better in coverage. He just didn't have a whole lot of chances to make plays in the run game, but he made his share of plays in the run game. He was really good in coverage. Even the one play where he gave up a catch, it was on a flea flicker, and the receiver had to make essentially a blind catch because he was blanketed by Zach Bond carrying the crossing route down the field, showing off his athleticism and his range. Now, finally, Isaiah Rodgers looks like the official dime back now. I don't know why it took him so long for them to make that move to Rodgers over Maddox. I understand Isaiah Rodgers didn't want to play as an interior corner because you're going to be asked to fit into the A gap, sometimes the B gap in the run game as a nickel corner in the Fangio defense. So I understand why 170-pound Isaiah Rodgers isn't built for that. But on obvious passing downs, it should have been Rodgers over Maddox as a dime back throughout the season. Now, I know part of the reason was injuries and Maddox had to fill in as a dime back on some plays, but Rodgers is definitely the better player to put back there. I'm glad they made that move. And we saw a rep of him playing dime last week as well. But the biggest takeaway from this game is that the Eagles are the bully on the block. They dominated the time of possession, 32 minutes and 52 seconds to 20 minutes and 8 seconds in this game. And this isn't a game where they didn't dominate on the ground, where they weren't able to just lean on the rushing game for 40 plays, 40 rushes in this game, right? They had to pass their way through this game as well, so it was impressive to see that they can beat you in any way that they want. And to pair with that, the defense is getting after opposing teams. That makes for a special team that can do big things in the postseason. The Steelers were physical. They punched them in the mouth multiple times. They were hitting. You could hear the pads popping on the broadcast version of the game. But the Eagles didn't back down, right? When they tried to bully Darius Slay, the entire team came over and stood up for him. I don't know how Slay didn't get a penalty because he clearly punched Darnell Washington a couple times, but whatever, man. The biggest takeaway is that you can't bully the bullies. This team is nothing like last year, where the 49ers came into their stadium, walked through their practice lines, and the Eagles just back down and let them do whatever they want. This team is built different. This team is ready to punish teams in the playoffs. So having said that, that will be it for today's podcast. We will be back on Thursday with our preview podcast of the Commanders game. But until next time, as always, remember to like, subscribe, and spread the word. And until next time, go Birds.